Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to be sharing this platform with such distinguished speakers and to have the opportunity to speak on an issue so pertinent in British politics and around the world. And if there's one lesson about British politics we learned from the Leveson Inquiry, it's that if you want to be a big player in government, you have to know how to flirt with Rupert Murdoch's henchmen and women. And I don't mean flirt in a metaphorical sense, I mean literally flirt. Nor am I just referring to the match made in heaven that is David Cameron and Rebecca Brooks. I'm referring to the warm and loving relationship between former Culture Secretary Jeremy Hunt and News Corp lobbyist Fred Michel. Consider this rather touching exchange of texts following television appearances that both made in an attempt to smooth the path for News Corp's takeover of B-Sky B in 2011. Fred, to Jeremy, you were great on the BBC this weekend! Exclamation mark. Jeremy, you too, Daddy. They called each other Daddy because their children were born the same day in the same hospital. Fred, great speech. Watched it with the cycling team. I can't believe you managed to do Newsnight as well! Exclamation mark. You really have stamina, Daddy! Exclamation mark. Jeremy, we all find it somewhere! Exclamation mark. No wonder Mr. Hunt felt it necessary prior to the exposure of these texts to tell Parliament that, and I quote, throughout the bid process, the contact that I had with Fred Michel was only at official meetings that were minuted with other people present. I mean, you've got to feel a bit sorry for the guy. As if having his surname so fantastically mispronounced by BBC Radio 4 presenter wasn't enough humiliation, he had to have his most intimate personal text messages exposed to the British public. So what has all this got to do with ownership? Well, it's pretty simple, I think. What Leveson exposed is the reality that when you become Prime Minister or Culture Secretary in this country, you become part of a special club. The likes of Brooks and Michel are not just your professional partners, with whom you love working together, to coin one of Rebecca's favourite phrases, but they become some of your closest and dearest friends, people you socialise with, get to know their families, go on holidays with. Of course, like any relationship, things can always turn sour, as we saw with John Major and Gordon Brown. But such episodes have merely provided pointers in the unofficial guide to winning power in British politics. The golden rule being, make friends with the biggest, most influential media figures, or condemn yourself to the backbenches or political exile. This is Britain, I should say. Excuse me. It's not Italy, it's not Nigeria, it's not Russia, or any of the places in the world where corruption in politics is a way of life. So how did it come to this, we might ask? It all began at a secret lunch at Chequers in January 1981 between Rupert Murdoch and Margaret Thatcher. Following that meeting, Margaret Thatcher overrode the Monopolies Commission and waved through Mr. Murdoch's purchase of the Times and Sunday Times, doubling his ownership of British newspapers overnight. Thatcher was to reap the rewards of her loyalty for the next 9 years in office, and so began decades of media ownership deregulation and the institutional love affair between big politics and big media. Coincidentally or not, so began the complete erosion of the left in mainstream British politics. The Labour Party soon realised that there were certain criteria for admission into this club, not least support for deregulation. And even when deregulation enabled the greatest economic collapse in modern times, few in the Labour Party dared to cross the Rubicon and start uttering those old dirty words like regulation, nationalisation, or mention the word welfare without adding reform. Today, 6 out of the 7 biggest national newspapers in this country by circulation peddle a conservative, neoliberal, right-wing agenda. For 2 decades, progressive politics in this country has had no choice and no voice. But it's not just Murdoch, and it's not just about the tabloids. The Russian billionaire owner of the Independent Evening Standard wrote the following tweet after giving testimony to the Leveson inquiry, and I quote, "Forgot to tell Leveson that it is unreasonable to expect individuals to spend millions of pounds on newspapers and not have access to politicians." Fascinating use of the word unreasonable here. Mr. Lebedev evidently hasn't quite mastered the British way of not being completely upfront about corruption in politics. Make no mistake, despite dwindling profits, newspapers are more relevant today than ever. Most of the biggest titles are reaching more audiences than they ever have before, courtesy of their online editions. And they still play a leading role in the news agenda. If you walk into any television newsroom in this country, the first thing you're likely to see is a large table covered in copies of the morning papers. The second insight revealed by this tweet is that newspaper owners have simply come to expect that their investments in news ought to pay off in political influence. This is a type of sleaze culture that is far more insidious and far-reaching than Cash for Questions or any of the networks of corruption that have undermined British democracy and faith in the three key Ps: politicians, police and the press. Ownership reform is more urgent and far more fundamental to the public interest than any of the issues which made up the bulk of Leveson's lengthy report. We need ownership reform now because trust in the integrity of our most sacred public institutions is at an all-time low, because the existing plurality regime has proved entirely unfit for purpose, poised as it was to wade through once again Murdoch's bid for empire expansion until the phone hacking scandal unfolded, because following that scandal, never has there been such a consensus that something needs to be done about media plurality, a consensus that stretches across borders and across the political divide. Because make no mistake, Murdoch has not and will not bow out gracefully. His latest moves to siphon off his press interests from his entertainment assets may yet pave the way for a new and, perish the thought, successful bid to buy out B-Sky B. And because in our increasingly mobile, technologically dependent and work-centred lifestyles, the media, and indeed the mainstream media, have become essential means by which we convene and converse as citizens in a democracy. For too long we've allowed that space to be annexed by narrow corporate interests serving shareholders and moguls over citizens and the public. We ought to reclaim that space. We can reclaim it, and we need to do it now. Thank you.